At the Castellano family's annual Christmas gala, beneath crystal chandeliers and false smiles, Isabella signed divorce papers with trembling hands, ending a marriage built on lies and a love she thought had died. But when Dominic Castellano, the most feared man in New York, found a pair of tiny baby shoes hidden in her drawer, that same night, everything changed. The papers went up in flames, and the truth she'd been hiding for 3 months became the spark that would either destroy them both or forge something unbreakable. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. The December wind cut through Manhattan's Upper East Side like a blade, rattling the tall windows of the Castellano estate. Inside, the grand ballroom glowed with warm light. Hundreds of candles flickered against gold-trimmed walls, and a 20-foot Christmas tree stood draped in white lights and crimson ribbons. The air smelled of pine, champagne, and expensive perfume. Guests in tailored suits and silk gowns moved through the space with practiced elegance, their laughter polished and their smiles sharp. Isabella Castellano stood near the marble fireplace, her emerald gown clinging to her frame, her dark hair swept into an elegant twist. She held a glass of sparkling water, untouched, her knuckles white around the stem. She watched her husband across the room, Dominic Castellano, 6 feet of controlled power in a midnight blue suit, his dark hair slicked back, his jaw carved from stone. He was speaking to a senator, his voice low and measured, his hand resting casually in his pocket. He looked every inch the legitimate businessman he pretended to be, but Isabella knew better. She knew the blood on his hands, the empire he controlled from the shadows, the way he could end a life with a single phone call. She had loved him once, loved the boy he'd been before the weight of his family's legacy crushed the softness out of him. Now, she barely recognized the man he'd become. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, a gesture so small no one would notice. 3 months. 3 months of carrying a secret that felt like a stone in her chest. She hadn't told him. She couldn't, not when he'd made it clear years ago that children had no place in his world, not when he'd grown so cold, so distant, that she wondered if he even remembered what it felt like to love her. The lawyer's envelope sat in her clutch, crisp and final. She'd signed the papers an hour ago, locked in Dominic's study while the party raged below. Her tears had smudged the ink on the last page, but it didn't matter. It was done. Mrs. Castellano. A voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see Marco, Dominic's right hand, a man with kind eyes and a dangerous reputation. He inclined his head. "Your husband is asking for you." Her stomach twisted. "Tell him I'll be there in a moment." Marco hesitated, his gaze flickering to her face. "Are you all right?" She forced a smile. "I'm fine." He didn't believe her. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes lingered on her for a beat too long. But he nodded and disappeared into the crowd. Isabella set her glass down on the mantel and smoothed her dress. She could feel the weight of the papers in her clutch, the finality of what she'd done pressing down on her chest. She had to leave tonight, before he found out, before everything fell apart. She crossed the ballroom, weaving through clusters of guests who greeted her with polite nods and hollow compliments. She found Dominic near the grand staircase, his hand extended toward her, his dark eyes locked onto hers. Unreadable, as always. "Dance with me," he said. It wasn't a request. She took his hand and he led her onto the floor. The orchestra began a slow waltz, and his arm slid around her waist, pulling her close. They moved together with the ease of years, their bodies remembering what their hearts had forgotten. "You've been avoiding me all night," he murmured, his breath warm against her temple. "I've been busy," she replied, her voice steady. "Busy." He repeated the word like it tasted bitter. His hand tightened on her waist. "You look pale. Are you feeling well?" "I'm fine." "You're lying." Her heart stuttered, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm tired, Dominic. That's all." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze searching her face for something she refused to give him. Then he leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "You've always been a terrible liar, Isabella." The music swelled, and she felt the tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. Not here, not in front of him. When the song ended, he released her, his hand lingering on hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "I have business to attend to," he said. "Don't leave without saying goodbye." She nodded, unable to speak, and watched him disappear into the crowd. 2 hours later, the party began to thin. Guests trickled out into the cold night, their laughter fading into the distance. Isabella slipped upstairs, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She moved through the quiet halls of the estate, past rooms filled with memories she no longer wanted to carry. She reached their bedroom and closed the door behind her. The space was vast and cold, decorated in shades of gray and white. She crossed to the closet and pulled out a small suitcase, her hands shaking as she folded clothes and tucked them inside. She didn't hear the door open, didn't hear his footsteps on the carpet. Going somewhere. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. She turned to find Dominic standing in the doorway, his jacket discarded, his tie loosened. In his hand, he held a pair of tiny white baby shoes, soft leather, no bigger than his palm. Her heart stopped. "I found these in your drawer," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Care to explain?" She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The room tilted, and she gripped the edge of the dresser to steady herself. He stepped closer, his eyes blazing with something she couldn't name. Anger, confusion, pain. "How long, Isabella? How long have you been keeping this from me?" 3 months, she whispered. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and unbreakable. He stared at her, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white around the tiny shoes. Then he turned and walked out. She heard him moving through the house, his footsteps echoing in the silence. She followed, her legs unsteady, her heart pounding in her chest. She found him in his study, the divorce papers spread across his desk. He held a lighter in his hand, the flame flickering in the darkness. "Dominic, don't—" He set the papers on fire. The flames consumed them quickly, curling the edges, turning her signature to ash. He watched them burn, his expression unreadable. And then he looked at her. "You're not leaving," he said. "Not now. Not ever." And for the first time in years, she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like hope. The morning after the Christmas gala, Isabella woke to an empty bed. The sheets beside her were cold, untouched. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, the events of the previous night replaying in her mind like a film she couldn't pause. The baby shoes, the burning papers, the way Dominic had looked at her, like she'd handed him both salvation and damnation in the same breath. She pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling the faint flutter of nausea that had become her constant companion. The baby, their baby. The secret she'd carried alone for 3 months, terrified of what it would mean in a world as brutal as his. She rose slowly, wrapping herself in a silk robe, and padded barefoot across the cold marble floor. The house was quiet, the remnants of the party cleared away as if it had never happened. She found Dominic in the kitchen, an oddity in itself. He stood at the counter, sleeves rolled to his elbows, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He looked up when she entered, his dark eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Sit," he said, his voice rough. She hesitated, then lowered herself into a chair at the small breakfast table. He set a mug in front of her, herbal tea, not coffee. He'd remembered. The realization sent a pang through her chest. He sat across from her, his hands wrapped around his own mug, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, taut and fragile, until finally, he broke it. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked down at her tea, watching the steam rise. "Because you made it clear, years ago, that you didn't want children. You said they were a liability, a weakness. That was before. Before what?" She lifted her gaze to his, her voice sharper than she intended. "Before you became the head of the family? Before you decided that nothing mattered more than power and control? Or before you stopped looking at me like I was anything more than a piece of furniture in your house?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "I never stopped." "Don't." She cut him off, her voice breaking. "Don't lie to me, Dominic. Not now." He set his mug down with a sharp clink, his hands curling into fists on the table. "I was trying to protect you. Do you understand that? Every decision I made, every wall I built, it was to keep you safe." "Safe?" She laughed, a bitter sound. "I've been drowning, Dominic, and you didn't even notice." The words hung between them, raw and unforgiving. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window, his shoulders rigid. Outside, the city stretched gray and cold under a blanket of clouds. Snow had begun to fall, soft and silent. "I noticed," he said finally, his voice low. "I just didn't know how to fix it." She closed her eyes, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. "You can't fix this. Not with money, not with power, not with anything you have." He turned to face her, and for the first time, She saw the cracks in his armor, the vulnerability he'd spent years burying. "Then tell me what you need. I need you to let me go." The words were out before she could stop them, and the moment they left her lips, she saw the impact. His face went pale, his hands clenching at his sides. "No. Dominic!" "No." He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to his knees in front of her chair. He took her hands in his grip almost desperate. "You're carrying my child, Isabella. Our child. You think I'm going to let you walk away from that? From us?" "There is no us," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "There hasn't been for a long time. Then we'll build it again." His voice was fierce, his eyes burning into hers. "From the ground up, whatever it takes." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But the years of silence, of distance, of feeling like a ghost in her own life, they weighed too heavily on her heart. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. He pressed his forehead to her hands, his breath shuddering. "Then let me prove it to you." The days that followed were strange and tentative. Dominic canceled meetings, postponed deals, and for the first time in years, he was home. He moved through the house like a man trying to learn a new language, his gestures awkward but earnest. He made her breakfast, insisted she rest, and hovered at the edges of her space like he was afraid she'd disappear if he looked away. Isabella didn't know what to do with this version of him. The man who'd burned her divorce papers and declared she wasn't leaving was also the man who now asked her how she was feeling, who brought her ginger tea when the nausea hit, who sat beside her on the couch in the evenings and didn't say a word, just existed in the same space, as if proximity alone could mend what was broken. But the cracks in their world ran deeper than either of them wanted to admit. One evening, Marco arrived at the house, his expression grim. Isabella was in the library, curled up with a book she wasn't reading, when she heard raised voices from Dominic's study. She set the book aside and moved quietly down the hall, stopping just outside the door. "Can't ignore this, Dom," Marco was saying. "The Morettis are pushing back. They know you've been distracted and they're testing boundaries. Let them test," Dominic replied, his voice cold. "I'll deal with it." "You can't deal with it if you're not present. You've missed 3 meetings this week. People are starting to talk. Let them talk." "Dominic," Marco's voice dropped, urgent. "This isn't just about you anymore. You have a family to protect now. If you show weakness, they'll come for her. For the baby." The word sent a chill down Isabella's spine. She pressed a hand to the door frame, her heart pounding. "I know," Dominic said quietly. "That's why I need to end this. Permanently." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the Morettis have been a problem for too long. It's time to remind them who runs this city." Isabella's breath caught. She pushed the door open, stepping into the study. Both men turned to look at her, surprise flickering across their faces. "What are you planning?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. Dominic's expression hardened. "This doesn't concern you." "Like hell it doesn't." She crossed the room, standing in front of him. "You just said they'd come for me. For our baby. So tell me, what are you planning?" He exchanged a glance with Marco, then sighed. "There's going to be a meeting. Tomorrow night. The Morettis and the other families. I'm going to make it clear that any threat to my family will be met with consequences." "Consequences," she repeated, her voice hollow. "You mean blood." He didn't deny it. She turned away, her hands shaking. "This is what I was afraid of. This is why I didn't tell you. Because I knew the moment you found out everything would spiral. And now you're planning a war. I'm planning to protect you," he said, his voice rising. "That's all I've ever done. By killing people?" She spun back to face him, tears streaming down her face. "By dragging us deeper into this nightmare? It's the only way." "No," she shook her head, backing toward the door. "There's always another way. You just refuse to see it." She left before he could respond, her heart breaking with every step. That night, she lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. She heard Dominic enter the room hours later, his footsteps slow and heavy. He didn't turn on the light. He simply sat on the edge of the bed, his back to her, and for a long time he didn't move. "I don't know how to do this," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be what you need and still keep you safe." She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Then maybe you need to choose." He turned to look at her, his face half-shadowed. "I already have." And in that moment, she realized the truth. Dominic Castellano would burn the world to keep her safe. The question was whether she could live in the ashes. The Moretti family had ruled Brooklyn for 3 generations, their influence spreading through the docks, the unions, and the underground gambling circuits that fed the city's appetite for risk. Vincent Moretti, the current patriarch, was a man in his 60s with silver hair, a tailored suit that cost more than most people's cars, and eyes like chips of ice. He'd built his empire on calculated cruelty and an unshakable belief that power was the only currency that mattered. Dominic had known Vincent since he was a boy, back when his own father had brokered uneasy truces and shared whiskey in smoke-filled rooms. But the old alliances had frayed over the years, worn thin by ambition and the relentless hunger for control. Now, with Dominic distracted, first by his crumbling marriage, then by the revelation of Isabella's pregnancy, Vincent saw an opening. The meeting was set for a warehouse in Red Hook, neutral ground where the 5 families could gather without the pretense of civility that came with restaurants or clubs. Dominic arrived with Marco and 2 other men, their presence a silent reminder that he was not to be underestimated. The air inside the warehouse was thick with the smell of oil and rust, the overhead lights casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor. Vincent was already there, flanked by his sons, Tony, the eldest, a brute with a taste for violence, and Luca, the younger, quieter one who handled the family's financial operations. The other families had sent representatives, the Russos, the De Lucas, the Costellos, all of them watching, waiting to see how this would play out. Dominic took his seat at the long metal table, his expression unreadable. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Let's be clear," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "There's been talk, rumors that I've lost focus, that I'm vulnerable. I'm here to tell you that anyone who believes that is making a fatal mistake." Vincent leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "No one's questioning your focus, Dominic. We're questioning your priorities. Word is, you've got a wife who's ready to walk out on you, a baby on the way. That's a lot of distractions for a man in your position." The room went silent. Dominic's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "My family is none of your concern. It is when it affects business," Vincent replied. "You've missed meetings. Deals have stalled. People are starting to wonder if you're still the man your father was." "My father," Dominic said slowly, "built this city on fear and blood. I've built it on something stronger, respect. But if you're asking whether I'm willing to spill blood to protect what's mine, the answer is yes." Tony Moretti leaned forward, his meaty hands flat on the table. Big words, but words don't mean much if you can't back them up. Dominic's gaze shifted to Tony, cold and unblinking. "Try me." The tension in the room thickened, the air crackling with unspoken threats. Marco shifted beside Dominic, his hand moving subtly toward the gun beneath his jacket. The other men around the table did the same, a chain reaction of readiness. Vincent raised a hand, his smile never faltering. "Easy, boys. No need for bloodshed. Not yet, anyway." He turned his attention back to Dominic. "Here's the thing, Dom. You want respect? You want us to believe you're still in control? Then prove it. Show us you can handle your house and your business. Because right now, it looks like you're trying to do both and failing at everything." Dominic stood, his movements deliberate. "I don't need to prove anything to you, Vincent. But since you seem to need a reminder, let me make this simple. Anyone who comes after my family, anyone who even thinks about it, will answer to me. And I promise you, the answer won't be pleasant." He turned and walked out, Marco and his men following. The door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing through the warehouse. Isabella was in the nursery when he returned. She'd spent the afternoon painting the walls a soft cream color, trying to focus on something other than the knot of fear in her chest. She heard the front door open, heard his footsteps on the stairs, and set the paintbrush down, her hands trembling. He appeared in the doorway, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder, his tie loosened. He looked exhausted, the weight of the meeting etched into every line of his face. "How did it go?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "As well as it could," he replied, stepping into the room. He looked around, taking in the half-painted walls, the crib they'd ordered but hadn't yet assembled, the small pile of baby clothes folded on the dresser. "You've been busy. I needed something to do." She wiped her hands on a rag, avoiding his gaze. "Did they threaten you?" "They tried. And I made it clear that threats against my family won't be tolerated." She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "What does that mean, Dominic? What did you do?" "Nothing yet," he said. "But if they push, I'll push back. Harder." "And what about us?" she asked, her voice breaking. What happens to us when you're too busy fighting wars to notice we're here? He crossed the room in 2 strides, taking her face in his hands. You are the war, Isabella. You and this baby. Everything I do, every decision I make, it's for you. Don't you see that? I see a man who's drowning, she whispered. And I don't know how to save you. He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath ragged. Then don't. Just stay. That's all I need. The days that followed were a fragile balance. Dominic threw himself into damage control, shoring up alliances and making it clear that any challenge to his authority would be met with swift retaliation. But he also made time for Isabella, small moments that felt like lifelines in the chaos. He sat with her while she painted the nursery. He read to her at night, his voice low and steady, the words of old novels filling the silence between them. He even smiled once, a rare, fleeting thing that made her heart ache. But the peace didn't last. One evening, Marco arrived at the house, his face pale. We have a problem. Dominic was in the study, reviewing contracts. He looked up, his expression sharpening. What kind of problem? The Morettis hit one of our shipments, took everything, cash, product, the works. And they left a message. He handed Dominic a photograph. It showed the warehouse where the shipment had been stored, now a charred ruin. Spray painted across the remaining wall were 3 words. Your move, Castellano. Dominic's hands clenched around the photo, his knuckles white. When? 2 hours ago. And our men? 3 dead, 2 in the hospital. The room went silent. Isabella, who had been passing by the door, froze. She stepped into the study, her eyes wide. Dominic, not now, he said, his voice like steel. Dominic, please. I said not now. He slammed the photo onto the desk, the sound sharp and final. She flinched, tears springing to her eyes. Without another word, she turned and left. Marco watched her go, then looked at Dominic. You need to fix that. I know, Dominic said quietly. But first, I need to end this. That night, Dominic made a decision. He called a meeting with his most trusted men, Marco, Sal, and a few others who'd been with him since the beginning. They gathered in the basement of the estate, a room lined with concrete and steel, soundproof and secure. We're going after the Morettis, Dominic said, his voice calm but unyielding. Not just Vincent, all of them. We take out their operations, their money, their people. We make it so they can't recover. That's a war, Sal said, his voice cautious. A real one. You sure you want to go down that road? I don't have a choice, Dominic replied. They've made it clear they won't stop, so we stop them first. Marco nodded slowly. What about Isabella? She's not going to like this. She doesn't have to like it, Dominic said. She just has to be safe. Upstairs, Isabella sat in the nursery, her hands resting on her stomach. She could feel the baby moving now, small flutters that reminded her of everything she had to lose. She thought about the man she'd married, the boy he'd been before the weight of his family's legacy had crushed the light out of him. She thought about the papers she'd signed, the ones he'd burned, and the choice she'd made to stay. And she wondered if love was enough to survive the storm that was coming. The snow fell heavier now, blanketing New York in a silence that felt unnatural. The city, usually alive with the hum of traffic and voices, seemed to hold its breath. Isabella stood at the bedroom window, watching the flakes drift down, her reflection ghostly in the glass. She pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling the baby shift, a reminder that time was running out, that decisions made now would shape a life that hadn't even begun. Behind her, the bed was empty. Dominic had been gone for 3 days. She'd tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Marco had stopped by once, his face drawn and tired, to assure her that Dominic was fine, that he was handling business. But the way Marco's eyes had flickered away when he said it told her everything she needed to know. Dominic was at war, and he wasn't coming home until it was over. She turned from the window and moved through the house, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The estate, once filled with the noise of the Christmas party, now felt like a mausoleum. She passed the nursery, the half-painted walls a stark reminder of the life she'd been trying to build. She passed Dominic's study, the door ajar, papers scattered across the desk, and she passed the kitchen, where the herbal tea he'd made for her days ago still sat, cold and forgotten. She ended up in the library, a room lined with leather-bound books and dark wood, the smell of old paper and smoke clinging to the air. She sank into one of the armchairs, pulling a blanket over her lap, and stared at the fireplace. The fire had gone out hours ago, leaving only ash. She didn't know how long she sat there before the phone rang. She picked it up, her heart leaping, hoping it was Dominic, but the voice on the other end was unfamiliar, smooth and cold. "Mrs. Castellano, my name is Luca Moretti. I believe we need to talk." Her blood ran cold. "How did you get this number?" "That's not important," Luca replied. "What's important is that you listen. Your husband has made some very poor decisions in the last few days. Decisions that are going to get people killed. I'm calling to offer you a way out." "I don't want anything from you," she said, her voice shaking. "Not even the truth?" Luca's tone was almost sympathetic. "You think Dominic is protecting you? But he's not. He's using you. You and that baby are leverage, Mrs. Castellano. A reason for him to justify the blood he's spilling. And when this is over, if he survives, you'll be left with a man who's more monster than husband. You don't know him," she whispered. "I know men like him," Luca said. "I've watched them destroy everything they love in the name of power, and I'm offering you a chance to walk away before it's too late. Leave him. Take the baby. I'll make sure you're safe." "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm tired of this war," Luca said quietly, "and because you deserve better than to be collateral damage." The line went dead. Isabella sat frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was Luca telling the truth? Was Dominic using her? Or was this just another move in a game she didn't understand? She set the phone down and buried her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't know what to believe anymore. When Dominic finally came home, it was past midnight. Isabella was still in the library, curled up in the chair, the blanket pulled tight around her. She heard the front door open, heard his footsteps in the hall, and then he was there, standing in the doorway. He looked like hell. His suit was rumpled, his tie gone, and there was a bruise along his jaw that hadn't been there before. His eyes, when they met hers, were hollow. "You're awake," he said, his voice rough. "I couldn't sleep," she replied. He crossed the room and sank into the chair opposite her, his head falling back against the cushion. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Luca Moretti called me," she said finally. Dominic's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "What?" "He called. He told me to leave you. He said you were using me." Dominic stood abruptly, his hands clenching into fists. "That son of a—" "Is he right?" she interrupted, her voice trembling. "Are you using me, Dominic? Is this baby just an excuse for you to justify the things you're doing?" "No." He crossed to her, dropping to his knees in front of her chair. "No, Isabella, you're not an excuse. You're the reason. The only reason." "Then why does it feel like I'm losing you?" she whispered, tears spilling down her face. "Why does it feel like you're slipping further and further away, and I can't do anything to stop it?" He took her hands in his grip almost desperate. "Because I'm trying to protect you, and I don't know how to do that without becoming the man you're afraid of." "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I'm afraid for you. I'm afraid that one day you're going to go too far, and you won't be able to come back." He pressed his forehead to her hands, his shoulders shaking. "I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to be anything other than this." She pulled her hands free and cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. "Then let me help you. Let me in, Dominic. Stop shutting me out." "I can't," he said, his voice breaking. "If I let you in, if I let you see everything, you'll leave, and I can't lose you. Not now. You're going to lose me anyway if you keep doing this," she said. "Don't you see that?" He closed his eyes, and for the first time, she saw him cry. Silent tears that slid down his face, carving paths through the exhaustion and the pain. She held him, her own tears falling, and for a moment, they were just two broken people trying to hold each other together. The next morning, Isabella woke to find a package on the kitchen table. It was wrapped in plain brown paper. No note, no return address. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a file, photographs, documents, bank statements. She flipped through them, her heart sinking with every page. They detailed Dominic's operations over the last 3 months. Shipments, deals, meetings with men whose names she recognized from the news. And at the bottom of the file was a photograph of Dominic, standing outside a warehouse, a gun in his hand. She set the file down, her stomach churning. This was what Luca had meant. This was the truth Dominic had been hiding from her. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Dominic in the doorway, his eyes locked on the file. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "It was on the table," she said. "Someone left it for me." He crossed the room and picked up the file, flipping through it. His jaw tightened, and he slammed it onto the counter. "Luca, is it true?" she asked. "All of it?" He didn't answer. "Dominic, is it true?" "Yes," he said finally. "It's true." She felt the air leave her lungs, the room tilting. "You lied to me." "I didn't lie," he said. "I just didn't tell you everything." "That's the same thing," she shouted, her voice breaking. "You stood there and told me you were protecting me, and the whole time you were—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I was doing what I had to do," he said, his voice rising. "To keep you safe, to keep this family safe. By killing people?" she demanded. "By becoming exactly the kind of man I was trying to escape? I've always been this man, Isabella," he roared. "You just didn't want to see it." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. She stared at him, her heart breaking all over again. "Then maybe I was wrong to stay," she whispered. She turned and walked out, leaving him standing alone in the kitchen, the files scattered across the counter like the remnants of a life that could never be whole. That night, Isabella packed a bag. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay. Not anymore. She was halfway down the stairs when she heard a crash from Dominic's study. She froze, her heart pounding, and then she heard his voice, raw, broken, filled with a pain she'd never heard before. She set the bag down and moved toward the study, pushing the door open. Dominic was on the floor, surrounded by shattered glass, his hands bleeding. He looked up at her, his eyes red and hollow. "I found something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "In my father's old files. A letter. He wrote it before he died." He held out a piece of paper and she took it, her hands shaking. The letter was short, written in a shaky hand. "Dominic, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I need you to know something. I built this empire for you, but it cost me everything. Your mother, my soul. Don't make the same mistake. Don't let power be the only thing you have left. Love is stronger. Remember that." Isabella looked up at Dominic, tears streaming down her face. "He knew. He knew," Dominic repeated. "And I didn't listen. I thought I could have both, power and you. But I can't. I've been trying to hold on to everything, and I'm losing it all." She knelt beside him, taking his bleeding hands in hers. "Then let go. Let go of the power. Let go of the empire. Choose us." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperation that broke her heart. "I don't know if I can." "Then we'll figure it out together," she said. "But you have to try." And for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that looked like surrender. The plan came together in the cold hours before dawn. Dominic sat at the head of the dining table, the room lit only by the pale glow of the chandelier overhead. Marco stood to his right, Sal to his left, and 3 other men, loyal, tested, unshakable, filled the remaining chairs. Isabella was upstairs, resting, though Dominic knew she wasn't sleeping. He could feel her worry like a weight pressing down on his chest. He spread a map of Brooklyn across the table, marking locations with red ink. "The Morettis have 3 main operations," he said, his voice steady. "The docks, where they move product. The casino on Atlantic Avenue, where they launder money. And Vincent's estate in Bay Ridge, where he thinks he's untouchable. We hit all 3 at once. We cripple them so completely they can't recover." "That's a lot of ground to cover," Sal said, his brow furrowed. "We don't have the manpower to hit all 3 simultaneously." "We don't need manpower," Dominic replied. "We need precision. Marco, you take the docks. Sal, the casino. I'll handle Vincent." Marco leaned forward, his expression grim. "You're going after Vincent yourself?" "I am." "That's suicide, Dom. He'll have 12 men with him. Maybe more." "Then I'll take 12 men with me," Dominic said. "But Vincent is mine." "This ends tonight." The room fell silent. The men exchanged glances, their faces a mix of concern and resignation. They knew better than to argue with Dominic when his mind was made up. "What about Isabella?" Marco asked quietly. "If this goes south—" "It won't," Dominic interrupted. "But if it does, you get her out. You take her somewhere safe, and you don't look back. Understood?" Marco nodded slowly. "Understood." Upstairs, Isabella sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting on her stomach. She could hear the low murmur of voices from below, the occasional scrape of a chair, the sharp click of a gun being loaded. She knew what was happening. Dominic was preparing for war, and there was nothing she could do to stop him. She thought about the letter from his father, the words that had broken something open in Dominic the night before. Love is stronger. She wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that love could pull him back from the edge, that it could be enough to save them both. But the weight of the world he'd built, the blood, the power, the endless cycle of violence, felt insurmountable. The door opened, and Dominic stepped inside. He looked exhausted, his face drawn, but there was a determination in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. "It's time," he said. She stood, crossing to him. "Don't do this. Please. There has to be another way." "There isn't," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "The Morettis won't stop. Not unless I make them. And I can't protect you, protect our baby, if I don't end this now." "And what if you don't come back?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What if I lose you tonight?" He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "You won't. I promise you, Isabella. I'm coming back." "You can't promise that." "I can," he said, "because I have something to come back to. You, this baby, a life that's worth more than all of this." He gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the city beyond. "I'm done, Isabella. After tonight, I'm done. No more wars, no more blood. Just us." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to so badly it hurt, but the fear in her chest wouldn't let go. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he said. "More than anything." He kissed her then, slow and deep, like he was memorizing the feel of her. And then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. The docks were a maze of shipping containers and rusted cranes, the air thick with the smell of salt and oil. Marco moved through the shadows with his team, their footsteps silent on the wet concrete. They'd cut the power to the area, plunging it into darkness, and now they waited, watching the Moretti guards patrol the perimeter. "On my mark," Marco whispered into his radio. The first shot was a whisper, a suppressed rifle taking out the guard nearest the entrance. The second followed a heartbeat later, and then chaos erupted. The Moretti men scrambled, shouting, reaching for their weapons, but Marco's team was faster. They moved like ghosts, taking out targets with ruthless efficiency. Within 10 minutes, it was over. The docks were theirs, the Moretti operation dismantled. Marco stood in the center of the carnage, his breath misting in the cold air, and radioed Dominic. "Docks are clear." "Good," Dominic's voice crackled back. "Move to the rendezvous point. We're not done yet." The casino was a different beast. It was loud, crowded, filled with people who had no idea they were standing in the middle of a war zone. Sal and his team entered through the back, bypassing security with forged credentials and a well-placed bribe. They moved through the service corridors, planting small charges at key structural points, and then slipped out as quietly as they'd come. Sal waited across the street, watching the casino's glittering facade. He checked his watch, counted down, and pressed the detonator. The explosions were controlled, precise. They didn't bring the building down, but they crippled it, severing power, collapsing the main vault, sending patrons scrambling into the street. The Moretti's money was buried under tons of rubble, inaccessible, gone. Sal radioed Dominic. "Casino's out of commission." "Good. Fall back." Vincent Moretti's estate was a fortress. High walls, armed guards, cameras at every angle. Dominic approached it with a small team, moving through the shadows of the surrounding trees. He'd studied the layout for days, memorizing every entrance, every blind spot. He knew this would be the hardest part, the most dangerous, but he also knew it was necessary. They breached the perimeter at the weakest point, a section of wall where the cameras had a blind spot. Dominic moved first, his gun drawn, his team close behind. They took out the guards silently, one by one, until they reached the main house. Inside, the estate was opulent. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, art that cost more than most people's homes. Dominic moved through it with cold focus, his mind locked on one goal, Vincent. He found him in the study, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his face calm despite the chaos unfolding around him. Vincent looked up as Dominic entered, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Vincent said. "It's over," Dominic replied, his gun trained on Vincent's chest. "Your operations are gone. Your money's buried. You've got nothing left." Vincent chuckled, setting his glass down. "You think this is over?" You think taking out a few warehouses and a casino is enough to stop me? I've been in this game longer than you've been alive, boy. I'll rebuild. I always do. Not this time, Dominic said. Vincent's smile faded. You're going to kill me then? In cold blood? That's not the man your father raised. My father's dead, Dominic said. And I'm not him. He pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the study, and Vincent slumped back in his chair, his eyes wide with shock. Dominic stood there for a moment, staring at the body, feeling the weight of what he'd just done settle over him like a shroud. Then he turned and walked out. By the time Dominic returned to the estate, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He was covered in blood, some his, most not, and his body ached with exhaustion. But he was alive. Isabella was waiting for him in the foyer, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She ran to him the moment she saw him, throwing her arms around his neck. You came back, she sobbed. You came back. I told you I would, he said, holding her tightly. She pulled back, her hands trembling as she touched his face, his chest, checking for injuries. Are you hurt? I'm fine. He lied. She didn't believe him, but she didn't push. She just held him, and he held her. And for a moment, the world outside didn't exist. It's over, he said quietly. It's really over. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. What happens now? Now, he said. We start over. No more wars. No more blood. Just us. And for the first time in years, he believed it. The weeks that followed were a strange kind of quiet. The city, which had been holding its breath, began to exhale. The Moretti family, leaderless and broken, scattered like ash in the wind. The other families, seeing what Dominic had done, chose to respect the new boundaries he'd drawn. There were no more threats, no more late-night meetings in shadowed warehouses. For the first time in years, Dominic Castellano was not at war, but the peace came with a cost. Dominic spent the first few days after the reckoning in a haze of exhaustion and guilt. He'd killed Vincent Moretti with his own hands, and though he knew it had been necessary, the weight of it sat heavy on his chest. He saw Vincent's face in his dreams, heard the echo of the gunshot, felt the cold finality of it all. He didn't speak about it, not even to Isabella, but she saw it in the way he moved through the house like a ghost, in the way his hands shook when he thought she wasn't looking. She didn't push him. She simply stayed close, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm of his thoughts. She brought him tea, sat with him in the library, and held his hand when the nightmares woke him in the middle of the night. Slowly, piece by piece, she helped him find his way back. One morning, she found him in the nursery. He was sitting on the floor, surrounded by pieces of the crib they'd ordered weeks ago, the instruction manual spread out in front of him. He looked up when she entered, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I thought I'd try to put this together, he said. Turns out I'm terrible at it. She laughed, a soft, genuine sound that filled the room with warmth. Let me help. They worked together, their hands moving in tandem, fitting pieces into place. It was slow, painstaking work, but there was something healing in it, something that felt like building a future instead of tearing one down. When the crib was finally assembled, Dominic stood back, his hands on his hips, surveying their work. It's crooked, he said. It's perfect, Isabella replied, slipping her hand into his. He looked down at her, his eyes soft. I don't deserve you. You're right, she said, a teasing smile on her lips. But you're stuck with me anyway. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I wouldn't have it any other way. As winter gave way to spring, the estate began to feel less like a fortress and more like a home. Dominic stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the family business, handing control to Marco and a carefully chosen board of advisors. He didn't disappear entirely. He was still involved, still made the big decisions, but he was no longer consumed by it. For the first time in his life, he had space to breathe. He spent his days with Isabella, learning how to be a husband again. They took walks through Central Park, the cherry blossoms blooming overhead, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the city. They cooked dinner together, their attempts often ending in disaster but always in laughter. And they talked, really talked, about the life they wanted to build, the kind of parents they wanted to be, the mistakes they didn't want to repeat. One evening, as they sat on the couch in the library, Isabella's head resting on his shoulder, she said, I've been thinking about names. Yeah? Dominic said, his hand resting on her stomach, feeling the baby kick. If it's a girl, I want to name her Grace, after your mother. He went still, his throat tightening. His mother had died when he was young, and he rarely spoke about her. But the thought of his daughter carrying her name, it felt like a gift he didn't deserve. She would have loved that, he said quietly. And if it's a boy? He thought for a moment, then said, Michael, after no one, just a name that's ours. She smiled, pressing a kiss to his jaw. Grace or Michael? I like that. The baby came on a warm night in late May. Isabella's labor was long and difficult, and Dominic spent every moment by her side, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, feeling utterly helpless in the face of her pain. When the baby finally arrived, a girl, with dark hair and her mother's eyes, he wept openly, holding her tiny body against his chest like she was the most precious thing in the world. Grace, Isabella whispered, her voice weak but filled with love. Her name is Grace. Dominic looked down at his daughter, at the way her tiny fingers curled around his thumb, and felt something shift inside him. All the violence, all the blood, all the years of building an empire, it all fell away, replaced by a single overwhelming truth. This was what mattered. This tiny, perfect life. This family. I'm going to be better, he said, his voice thick with emotion. For her, for you. I'm going to be better. Isabella reached up, cupping his face in her hand. You already are. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and quiet joy. Dominic learned how to change diapers, how to soothe Grace when she cried, how to sing lullabies in a voice that was rough but tender. He was clumsy at first, unsure of himself, but Isabella was patient, guiding him with gentle hands and a soft smile. One night, as he rocked Grace to sleep in the nursery, he thought about his father's letter. Love is stronger. He'd spent so long believing that power was the only thing that mattered, that control was the only way to protect the people he loved. But now, holding his daughter in his arms, he understood. Love wasn't a weakness. It was the strongest thing he had. He looked down at Grace, at her peaceful face, and whispered, I'm going to give you a different life, a better one, I promise. By the time Grace's first birthday arrived, the estate had been transformed. The cold, austere rooms had been filled with warmth, photographs on the walls, toys scattered across the floor, laughter echoing through the halls. Dominic had sold off parts of the business, distancing himself from the darker aspects of his past, and invested in legitimate ventures, real estate, technology, philanthropy. He wasn't naive enough to think he could erase his history, but he could build something new on top of it. The party was small, just family and a few close friends. Isabella had decorated the backyard with balloons and streamers, and Grace, in a tiny pink dress, sat in her high chair, smashing cake into her face with gleeful abandon. Dominic stood beside Isabella, his arm around her waist, watching their daughter with a smile that felt like it might never fade. She's perfect, Isabella said. She is, Dominic agreed. Just like her mother. Isabella looked up at him, her eyes shining. We did it. We actually did it. We did, he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. And we're not done yet. That night, after the guests had left and Grace was asleep in her crib, Dominic and Isabella stood in the nursery, watching their daughter breathe. The room was bathed in soft moonlight, the same light that had filtered through the windows on the night Dominic had burned the divorce papers. Do you ever think about that night? Isabella asked quietly. The Christmas party? Every day, Dominic said. Do you regret it? Burning the papers? He turned to her, his eyes serious. Not for a second. You and Grace, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. I'd burn 1,000 papers if it meant keeping you. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. I love you, Dominic Castellano. I love you too, he said. More than you'll ever know. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching their daughter sleep. Outside, the city hummed with life, but inside, in that small, quiet room, they had everything they needed. And for the first time in years, Dominic Castellano felt at peace. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more emotional and gripping tales, and leave a comment below telling me where in the world you're listening from. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more stories with you. Until next time, take care.